Joining us this morning for this first panel. Welcome to everyone in the room and online. My name is Sheng Chia. I'm a policy fellow at the Center for Global Development, which is a think tank in DC. And I'm delighted to be moderating today's conversation on what emerging economies want from AI. I'm going to go straight into, oh, yes, and Nanjira's here, fantastic. Let me welcome our panelists. I'm going to start with Nanjira.
This is an HBS tradition. Whoever comes in late gets to be cold.
There will also, in a bit, be a bit of a question and answer session, so be prepared for that. But Nanjira Sambuli is a non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Nanjira studies the gender impacts of digitalization and ICT adoption, especially in Africa. We also have Dr. Shikoh Gitau, who is the CEO of Qhala, an innovation lab providing digital solutions to African markets. And next to her on her left, we have Dr. Umar Saif, founder and CEO of aiSight.ai and CEO of Qhala Ventures, Pakistan's largest ventures studio. And on the far end, we have Teresa Clarke, chairman and CEO of Africa.com, which just conducted a fascinating survey about public attitudes towards AI across 35 African countries. And we're going to hear more about that in a bit. But before we jump into these wonderful panelists, allow me to frame this conversation. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, wrote late last year that with new powerful AI, I quote, "We can have shared prosperity to a degree that seems unimaginable today," and that AI would meaningfully improve the lives of people around the world. Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, has said that we can have a country of geniuses in a data center. Well, we hear lots about AI's capabilities. We also hear calls for greater access. The two CEOs I mentioned have called for it. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has said that AI can provide a quantum leap if it is properly democratized. But I'm going to ask the question, is powerful technology and greater access enough? We're at an academic institution, so allow me to bring up some research papers and allow me to ask you to respond as well. And these papers are on another very powerful technology. Some might call it the grandparent of general purpose technologies, and this is electricity. So just with a show of hands, get ready to raise your hands. Just respond with the most intuitive reaction. If you think that connecting a rural household to electricity leads to improvements in the household's incomes. Just quick show of hands, quick show of hands. Okay, so policy proposal landed on your desk today. We're buying it, right? Electricity leads to greater incomes. So I think it's so intuitive. I put my hand up before I read the study coming out of done in Kenya. It's a randomized impact evaluation that showed that connecting households to electricity for free or at a highly subsidized rates led to no improvements in income at the 16 or 32-month mark. On income, they also tested whether kids learn more. Presumably, you could imagine that kids would study more at night. And it wasn't just in Kenya. The lab, JPEL, run out of MIT, found that 4 out of 7 experimental and quasi-experimental studies done recently found no impacts of electricity on income. Super unintuitive, right? I would have bet my bottom dollar that electricity would have allowed a household to power a refrigerator, sell higher value goods. I bring these studies up not because we shouldn't invest in electricity, and electricity is incredibly important, and I want to be careful about overgeneralizing, and electricity and AI are two separate technologies. But I think it's a cautionary tale that when we talk about the power of AI and we talk about the need for more access, we also need to talk about whether its adoption leads to development outcomes we care about. Does the products that we end up using lead to greater profits? Does it lead to greater literacy? And Dean Weinstein talked about a number of different examples. Tutors for kids, can you have there's 5 country study that did, that had teachers call students over 2G networks that led to improvements in learning outcomes equivalent to 1 to 2 years. There are not enough teachers that can do that. Can AI call you over a 2G network in a rural community? There's a nonprofit in India that's doing exactly that. So today we're going to have a wide-reaching conversation touching on everything from how AI can impact families in emerging economies to what governments and corporations are hoping to get from this technology. I'm gonna be asking these questions to these wonderful panelists. We're going to have about a 45-minute discussion, 50-minute discussion, and then open it up to this group. That all sound great? Super, awesome. So I'm going to start with Shikoh, who has had an illustrious career, done incredible things, built an app that connected job seekers to employers in South Africa, ran the M-Pesa's innovation lab. M-Pesa is, of course, famous mobile money product. Can you walk us through your dream scenario of how you see families in Kenya and across sub-Saharan Africa using AI?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm quite excited about sitting in this. I know when Fatma called me, I was like, what are we going to talk about? I love talking, so there's going to be something, of course. But I want to pick up on an example that you gave around electricity. I'm feeling a little bit imposter syndrome because my PhD advisor is sitting in this room, so I have to behave. Hi, Jonathan. So I'm going to try to be very academic, so he's not disappointed. Anyway. You talk about electricity as the grandfather of AI. Can we come down to the parent of AI, which is the internet? So I totally disagree, and that's part academic. With that paper, we need to redo that research around the outcomes from electricity connection, because we know there's one thing a paper saying something, and there's reality on the field, and what you have seen from just being observational, being living there and lived in experience. So I totally disagree with that paper. We need to talk to the author. Number 2, let me come to the work that I actually did around mobile internet. So I was fortunate and young enough, let's go with young enough, to be amongst the first people to actually study the impact of mobile internet on the African continent. It was very predictive at that point, and we were just projecting what would households in Africa do with mobile internet. And this was before smartphones. It was on the small Nokia 3-inch phone, and we were looking at what households will do with mobile internet when they get them. Yeah, and through the study of my PhD, I started with just understanding what are people using the internet for. What was the biggest use case at that point? Give me one. Social media. It was Mixit in South Africa, yeah, and porn. 2 things. Porn has not changed, neither has social media changed 10 years after. But from an economic point of view, we studied how people are actually using it. Now we said, okay, let's put porn and social media on the side. What is the other thing that people are using it for? And it was for looking for jobs. Did it have an economic impact? Yes. Yeah. So the study, I had to change from being a computer science major to being an economics major, because I had to study the impact of okay, we've connected you to a job, then what? And when you did an impact study, there are people who are moving from a little over 100 Rand to 3,000 Rand a month income because they were connected to the right job. And why were they connected to the right job? Because they didn't have access to that job earlier. And for me, that is why I'm bullish around AI, because I feel like it's a quantum leap from what the internet is. And the good thing is both Gustav and Jonathan here. Jonathan helped me think and become a student. Gustav, where is that Gustav? Gustav acquired my PhD, and we moved we had 1.1 million users, and this is 2009 in Africa. So we can see the impact of what technology can actually do on the African continent. In terms of what's a use case for why AI is important on the African continent, I'll touch the one that Americans and Europeans don't actually understand. The disease burden in Africa, yeah? So every time I use this data, I think it's not that bad. Africa has 17% of the world population and 1% of the medical medics, yeah? That is fine, doesn't look that bad, right? But the disease burden is in terms of 1 doctor to 10,000 patients. Not that bad also, right? But you only have 3,000 pathologists on the African continent. That is bad. So for population's sake, is 1.5 billion people to 3,000 pathologists. So for a household with a cancer patient, it will take 40 to 60 days to get a cancer diagnostic. And you know, if it's a rapidly developing cancer diagnosis, what happens is that somebody will die without ever getting treatment. So for that household, and this is an actual use case, we're working with a data pathology network that is using computer vision for AI, is for that patient getting their specimen going through an AI visualization and computer vision and getting a positive cancer diagnosis is a matter of life and death. Yeah, and yesterday we were arguing, do I want 100% NHS approved medical tool as AI as a medical tool, or do I want like a 75%? I'll take 75% any day and get treatment rather than wait for 100%. And that's why I am particularly bullish around AI. We're talking about, what did you call me? AI optimist.
I asked if you.
I am 100% AI optimist. Yes. Back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, and thank you for walking us through the specific examples of how a health system can benefit. You know, I want to turn to Teresa. Shikoh's talked about, you know, okay, for us, if we're designing health systems, we're designing new screening methods. But Teresa, you can speak to folks outside of this room, because Africa.com conducted a survey with thousands of respondents across 35 countries. And this optimism is shared from your survey respondents. I was stunned by the statistic. A vast majority, 78% of respondents said they believe that AI will have a positive impact on Africa. And this was actually flipped, and the respondents in the US found were actually very dismal. So can you tell us about the survey more broadly, and can you also tell us why there is such optimism among your respondents?
Good. Well, you've given the headlines away already, so. Excuse me. Yeah, so we conducted a survey on Africa.com. We made it such that a third of the questions overlapped with a similar survey that's done in the United States by Pew Research for a survey that they do called How Americans Think About AI. And we wanted there to be an overlap of about a third of the questions so that we could do a comparative analysis. But the other 2/3 of the questions were specific for Africa. I have some fabulous slides. You know, a picture's worth 1,000 words, but I was told I couldn't use slides, so I'm going to have to explain what's on the picture too. And I'm sorry, I've got to do this on my phone, but essentially we had the countries that were most represented, not surprisingly, are Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa. We also had respondents throughout the diaspora. One thing that I'd like to just caveat with respect to this survey is that the Pew Research in the US is intended to be the man in the street in the US. Our sources, our audiences at Africa.com are not so much man in the street. And so we actually have, for example, just to put in perspective, in the Pew Research study, about 38% have a college degree. In our research, about 78% have a college degree. So I always like it when Africa outperforms, but Africa is outperforming the US in this particular survey. But I do think that it may skew the data. That's why I mention it, because I think that we have not just average citizens, but we have very well-informed people in Africa who responded to this survey. And just as Hans said, 78% think that AI will have a positive impact on Africa. Of our respondents, 79% had used ChatGPT, so that also tells you a little bit about our respondents. When we asked them what they had used ChatGPT for, most of them said to learn something new. The second group was for something at work, and the third group was for entertainment. When we asked, where do you think AI can benefit Africa the most? The first area was education. The second area was healthcare. Third was agriculture. When we asked about concerns about the use of AI, the first concern, not surprisingly, is job displacement. Number 2 was ethical issues, and number 3 was lack of transparency. And then this was a comparative one that we did relative to the US, where we asked, overall, would you say that the increased use of AI in daily life makes you feel either more excited than concerned, equally concerned and excited, or more concerned than excited? And again, I won't read you all the numbers, so I'll just try to give you the headline. And that is to say, as Han has already mentioned, about 35% of Africans were more excited than concerned compared to 10% of Americans. And so this is where we start to see this enthusiasm coming out. When we ask, what are your concerns about the use of AI in Africa? Interestingly, again, the optimism came through. But with respect to government, which we're here to talk about at this conference among policymakers, 55% of Africans said that government will go too far in regulating the use of AI. That was a concern among Africans. That was much less so among Americans. Only 31% of Americans were concerned about government going too far. On the other side, in the US, 67% felt that government will not go far enough, whereas in Africa, only 45% felt that government would not go far enough. I'll go through a couple of other, just when we talk about use cases and whether what Africans thought of with respect to whether it would help or hurt. Africans felt that the areas in which AI would help the most are to help people find products and services that they're interested in online. Agriculture was really a very big one, where they said that they thought farmers could get information to produce food. And I think there's been a lot written about that, and so that use case is widely appreciated, I think, across Africa. I think that's why that was listed so high. And then at the end, are you optimistic or pessimistic? And as Han has already given away, 71% are optimistic. But one thing I'd just like to share with you in closing is that these respondents were incredibly engaged around this survey. And we actually we had an open-ended area, and we got 2,200 responses, and there were many full paragraphs. People uploaded papers that they had written at their various universities. I mean, we had massive amounts of qualitative data to sift through on the open-ended piece. And I'd just like to read you 4 short quotes as to what people said, which I think is very helpful. One person said, AI applications are exactly like humans. You have good people and you have bad people. It will really come down to the same ethical and moral choices that we make every day. Which choices we make will determine the good and the bad contribution made to humanity via AI. Another respondent said, thanks to AI, I've launched a company in Nigeria that supports organizations in drafting their business plans. AI makes it much easier for experts in the field, of course, and the rest of the work in the case of my company is editing, proofreading, which is a considerable time saver. A third respondent said, localized solutions. Developing AI solutions tailored to local contexts is essential. Solutions should consider cultural, linguistic, and socioeconomic factors to effectively address the unique challenges faced by African communities. A fourth one said, it's important for stakeholders to collaborate, share knowledge, and work towards inclusive and ethical AI solutions that benefit the continent as a whole. And the last point, I think, was a very well-written response that we received that basically, in summary, is, garbage in is garbage out, like anything. And with Africa having limited digital data sources and the potential Western biases baked into many of these data sources, if these data quality issues are not addressed, then the machines that learn human tasks, like the humans who create the data, will be limited in their knowledge about Africa and will replicate those biases that humans have with respect to Africa and Africans. That's why it's so important for Africans to be at the table for this next AI chapter in our lives as humans on this planet, so that Africa can utilize AI as a path to break free of the constraints that humans, Africans and non-Africans, have allowed to hold Africa back in modern history. So that's my conclusion of the survey.
So very interesting. Thank you for putting that survey together and sharing it. I guess maybe I can open it up to the panel here. I'm very curious. So there's a ton of optimism. Could you share why this optimism exists, especially if we hear that in the States there's a lot more caution and pessimism? Why is there this optimism coming from the continent?
Nanjira,
Why is everyone voting me to say that? Go first. First of all, good morning, everyone. I've observed the surveys over almost 2 decades now, and it's context that's almost always missing. Optimism is easy, right? And I'll just give a comparative from, it was around 2016. I think it was a Pew Research survey, actually. And it was assessing perceptions on online privacy. And the study said, countries like Kenya and Indonesia and others, those guys don't care about online privacy. But what was missing in translation is what privacy translates to. Privacy sometimes tends to be when you have something to hide, right? So when you come and ask me a yes, no question about privacy without contextualizing, we're like, yeah, I mean, right? So these surveys are indicative, but I don't usually think they're a yardstick for really gauging. Optimism is absolutely a currency, I suppose, because we need to succeed. I mean, this is just a reality, and it's visceral, especially for a continent that is of young people seeking out opportunities, and the cans that have been kicked down the road are in your face. So when confronted with that, what are you going to do? Give in? Absolutely not. But that's why saying optimism is not enough, because what does that actually translate to? I think we've seen in practice last year, in June of 2024 in Kenya, for example, where generative AI was used as a tool for civic engagement. For the first time, I think there was a generation that got to even learn and study the Constitution, because it was introduced as a GPT alongside the bill that was being protested. And basically, there was a stack of GPTs that was helping people make sense of why we were on the streets. That gives people optimism, right? Opportunities and where I can get the next big deal, absolutely. If something can make it easier for me to do that, I will absolutely be optimistic for it. The question and a bigger challenge is, are those opportunities meeting people at that point? And this is where the electricity thing, I think, pressed a lot of us, is because of the way the development logic has always followed. So much is missed in context, and so many of us, researchers like myself, spend so much time spilling so much ink in trying to bring back the context that is stripped on those kinds of studies. There's something that I hope, to the question of our topic here, and then to turn back to you, what do emerging economies want from AI? Clarity, I would say in short. Clarity of what will actually work. There's so much experimentation. Kenya has been mentioned since last night. For all the interventions in Kenya, Kenya should be somewhere else, in my view. Right? And it's not. So what is it that, I think AI is almost like separating the wheat from the chaff, in the sense that it's not so much about what intervention on AI is going to do the thing. It's about we cannot leapfrog from no electricity to an AI future. That's just some reality. So when we talk about leapfrogging, you have to bring it back to nuance. So clarifying these topics is what I think we want from AI. And I think that cuts across whether it's government folks, I wish they were in the room, the ministers we met yesterday, or young people, or anyone in between, because clarity is what is missing in a context, in a place that is so diverse and reduced to, RCT studies. That is what I think is at the essence of it, and was not going to be captured neatly in these instruments.
So I'm going to stay on Kenya for a little bit more, and stay on another RCT, if that's okay. And then I want to move to Pakistan.
Thank you.
So there's a lot of optimism, and you asked for clarity of what works. There are now more and more studies that are coming out showing that AI can have uneven impacts on people who use it. There's a study in Turkey recently that showed there was one group that had one form of an AI tutor and another group that had a different form of AI tutor, and when you removed the AI tutor, one of the groups actually performed worse in their studies after. And then earlier on, the dean gave me a shout out, but it's really Rem Koning's work from HBS here, that did a study on entrepreneurs in Kenya that showed that different demographics responded differently. Some made more money and others made less. I don't want to spoil his headline. Can folks on this panel talk a little bit, and maybe you're well positioned for this as well, is this question of uneven impacts? Who else should we be thinking about here? Students, are there gender differences? Are there age differences? Are there demographics that we expect to be impacted differently?
Yeah. Well, in the case of Rem's study, it was actually surreal that we got to then meet about his study as I was invited to critique it, and got to share some perspectives around even the kind of advice that the chatbot that they were testing was issuing, the resonance on some level, not on the kind of content, because I got to see what you're paying and what it will give you as advice, is going to probably resonate with someone who's interacted with those terms before. So it's likely going to be somebody who's either been to a business class or something like that. It does not mean that the person who does not relate to those terminologies would not need that advice. And the kind of advice that folks will need, especially as entrepreneurs, is from other entrepreneurs. Not from, sorry to say, the HBS review. And so part of the challenge is how do you then also use that same modality to learn from those entrepreneurs in that context who can offer insight and then contextualize it to that. So that would be the next step where that kind of work would go, because you'll find the kind of advice folks in development tend to think entrepreneurs or people in low resourced environments want, it tends to be condescending, to be honest. Think about this, cookie cutter model of things, and actually, I'm trying to make it sense in my context. Is that context studied in the corpus that is supposed to be feeding the AI model? Most times not. We have a saying in Kenya, on the ground things are different, and it's already come up quite a lot already today. Part of what we do need going forward is how, whether it's RCTs or other ways of studying and other ways of knowing, how we incorporate, and especially through AI, different ways of knowing. We tend to favor so much the data side of it, the quantitative, but there are different ways of knowing. And those different ways of knowing are so critical to how AI will reach the people who have not been reached by it today.
And let me jump on that. So I heard about that. So funny thing, we have something you're calling Biashara app, which is like a co-pilot for small businesses. And the difference is when you speak to the small, we call them mama mbogas, the traders, is they don't want to there's so many apps that have been built for small businesses. But the knowledge base of that is informing those apps and those chatbots, again, is HBS material. We all love it. We want to put it on LinkedIn, right? But those women, all they want to do is make more money for that day. Yeah. So what is the right knowledge for them for that day? Yeah. And every time I speak to people here in the US, in Europe, they say, oh, small businesses want this and want that. Saying, who said? Because these are the mechanics and the methodology that I work. This is what we've been trained in business school. They think it applies to everybody. And that is what one of the key things that Nanjira has spoken about is about context. The other thing is culture, yeah? And it's the culture and nuances of doing businesses, yeah? We're not a cutthroat economy. We want to be able to grow with everybody. Our identity is formed within our community. And the moment you lose that as you're building your platform, then there is a problem, yeah? And finally, I want to talk about language, and I'm sure we're going to be speaking about this. So the one thing I've seen everybody defaulting to is, we are building something for Africa. It must speak Swahili. No. So what if it speaks Swahili? Is it the correct Swahili? So one of the key things we are building is a sandbox for AI so that all of you can actually get some help. And when you do an evaluation of the different frameworks and different languages, you realize that 3 of the 5 top models are still speaking King James Swahili.
King James.
Do you know what King? When biblical most of the models have been trained on biblical text. So if you're Christian and you read King James, not New King James, King James, the original text that was translated to Kiswahili is what they're using for text. So when most people say, I don't even use that word. Even I don't use that word. And I went through proper training in Swahili, right? So that is number one. Number 2 is the context of use of those words. I always give an example of my son's name. My son is called Kiama. Kiama means miracle in my language. Kema also means 15 different other things in different other languages. So when a model picks Kiama, it will translate to whatever comes to its mind first, not within the context of use. And that is a problem. Kiswahili, we were testing a model and we asked something in Kiswahili, it spit back Hindi. because some of the words that are there, we share with Hindi, we share with Arabic, we share with some of the Middle Eastern dialects. So, and even in Middle Eastern dialects, there are like 15 other dialects inside there. So for me, it is beyond having the right corpus, which is a big problem, and people need to work on them, is also understand the context that these small businesses are using this text on. Yeah.
That's incredible. I'm going to remember that the King James Swahili. This. I want to bring Umar in. You work. You analyze a lot of small business data. You started a company, aiSight.ai, and one of the services you offer is satellite imagery to predict how many people live in a given area, how many mom and pop stores are there, what's the economic status of a neighborhood, and then how businesses can resupply certain neighborhoods faster, have restock and have better inventory. So there's a lot of business optimization. We've talked about how AI can impact the individual family, both in very positive ways and in uneven ways. Can you talk about how businesses are using AI, using products like yours, and to grow?
Sure. Well, let me first try and question the optimism about AI. And when I used to be a college professor many years ago, I was part of a small group that started a field called ICTD, which is ICT for development. And then Kentaro wrote a book about it, which the dean just referred to. And there was a lot of optimism about using ICT for development in parts of the world that we come from. And most of the literature around that, now there are many conferences, folks have been tenured in universities in that field, is that technology that gets, the optimism about technology that gets glamorized in conference halls like this is hardly ever used or appropriate for countries that we come from. And now, many years later, I look at AI with the same lens. And AI, and again, as a college professor, I don't know what passes for AI these days. Different people have different interpretations of what AI is. But kind of, let's assume the monolith of AI requires two things: lots of computing power and lots of data. Now, for lots of computing power, you need lots of electricity and lots of very expensive GPUs, some that not countries that we come from are even allowed to import or will be allowed to import anytime soon. So therefore, one, there is kind of this all-purpose generative AI will be, I don't know how useful it would be, but it'll be, of course, almost always too expensive to be put to any scalable use. So for instance, if you wanted to use ChatGPT as a tutor in a country like Pakistan, for the cost that you would incur in a month, you can hire 17 full-time school teachers. For a small data center that you put together to assess examinations of the matriculation system automatically, AI is able to do that these days, you can build 19 small hospitals. So it's not just the cost, it's not the question of cost, but also opportunity cost. What else can you do with those resources? And two, these systems require data, and she said their system has been trained on some archaic language use and some religious scripture. And there is no data available in the countries that we come from to train these systems. Data at best sit in silos, hardly talk to each other, and is religiously guarded by various flavors of bureaucracy. And so, training an AI system, even if it did recognize Urdu, for doing anything half decent or actually useful, I can't imagine that happening in a few years from now. So I just wanted to question that optimism. As someone who understands technology and who's lived through many years of various imaginations and reimaginations of how highfalutin technology from where I used to work, not far away from here, and in universities like this would find use in developing countries like Pakistan and Africa. Now let me come back to the question that you
Yes,
asked.
because you have started an AI company after that. Providing men's knowledge among too many
No,
companies.
indeed.
So,
But it is for large, so it's not for small companies. It is for companies that can afford it. So our clients are the Procter & Gamble's and Coca-Cola's of the world. And we started in emerging markets because they used to call these countries dark markets for them, where they essentially had no data but consumers or retail markets. Now, this is about 180 countries, emerging countries, so to speak. And these were very large countries. They could drive a lot of growth for these companies. To take an example of Nigeria, Nigeria has something like 3 million retail outlets. Brazil has 5.5 million retail outlets. Pakistan has 1 million retail outlets compared to the US, which is 2.9 million retail outlets. So these are very large countries. Just the number that I'm telling you is a big mystery for a lot of these large companies. They don't even know where to go and sell their products. Granular population data, despite Landscan and WorldPop, is hardly available in these parts of the world. So they don't even know where their consumers are. They don't know what the affluence of those consumers are. So they don't know where to go sell their products. Who do they sell their products to? At what price? How much? Which are their basic questions. So we go in and we build kind of a crowdsourced version of AI, so to speak. And you're familiar with some of the work that Josh has done. He's certainly one of the guys who just got tenured on aiSight.ai work. This is at iSchool at Berkeley. And this is about poverty mapping work, which is using remote sensing or satellite imagery analysis to be able to assign an affluence score to a neighborhood. So you look at a country through satellite imagery, looking at road density and whether the community is gridized or not gridized, or rural or urban, and what's the nightlight luminance there, and so on and so forth. There were various things that you could do with this. And mobility data and social media access and internet access and all of that data, you could these days either get from cellular companies or from satellite imagery. And just based on that, you could assign an affluence score to a neighborhood. And based on this, you could turn that into a commercial value and advise Coca-Cola on how to price their products in this neighborhood, because that's the buying power of consumers living there. You can actually get very good, through AI models, population estimations these days, using what is called building volume estimations. You can 3D map an area. You can see how much volume this building occupies, and in a neighborhood like this, how many humans would typically exist in a building like this. So you can actually estimate the number of consumers. So you can tell Coca-Cola on how much beverage they can sell, at what price to consumers in this neighborhood. Now, that's the kind of thing they're used to doing in countries like the US, where there's a lot of good data available at a zip code level. So to be able to reinvent that in these emerging economies is what my company does. So we use satellite imagery analysis. We use call data records, anonymized call data records from cellular companies. But more so, we can also crowdsource data very quickly. So almost everyone now these days have a cell phone. And you can Uberize data collection, which means that you can have someone local run down to a grocery shop and see if Coca-Cola exists in a chiller there or not. So you can do a product stock check, or you could do a price check or a competitor price check by someone who's local, by paying them literally $3 to just run down to a store and collect that data. So you could crowdsource data that otherwise doesn't exist in these countries very, very quickly and very, very cheaply, essentially by Uberizing through a mobile app. And crowdsourcing from lots and lots of people. You could use satellite imagery to do poverty or affluence analysis or socioeconomic class analysis. You could do number of consumers using satellite imagery analysis. You could do mobility patterns, how far people travel to buy products using cellular data, et cetera. So I call it crowdsourced AI in these parts of the world, where data sets that otherwise didn't exist because the government Census Bureau doesn't make their data digitally available. There's no good data about household income or affluence. There's very little data about retail markets. So how can you generate this data using satellite imagery, crowdsourcing, and cellular call data records? So that's what we put to good use. Lots of research in the aiSight.ai world packaged for commercial usage for large CPG. So that's kind of what we do.
Excellent. And it stimulates firms to enter underserved regions.
Indeed, actually every company that you work with, On average, they grow about 3 to 5% in terms of the market share within 6 months. That's a few $100 million for a large company.
Super. Well, actually, let's move now to talk about what companies in emerging economies want from AI. I think that was a great segue. Teresa, I want to bring you in here because I know Africa.com, yes, it talks about arts and culture on the continent, but you also work a lot with business leaders. Can you tell us how business leaders are thinking and what their aspirations for AI are?
Sure. And I want to respond to a few things that Umar said as well. When we talk about AI in the developing world, and it's come up on this panel already, we talk about electricity. And I find that we don't really spend enough time talking about just how critical this electricity issue is. I also serve on the board of a company called American Tower. We are the largest owner of cell towers in the US and in Africa.
Feel free to ask.
Feel free to ask. And so among our different assets, we also own data centers in the United States. So we own 25 data centers in the US. Our clients are Amazon, Google, all of the high-tech companies are our tenants in our data centers. And one of the concerns that we have in the United States is where we can put the next data center because we can't get enough electricity in the US, in Silicon Valley, in New York, in Boston. The amount of electricity, just to put it into perspective, the amount of electricity that is required for AI in the United States is equivalent to the entire amount of electricity consumed by the country of Japan. That's just for AI in the US. So it is so electricity hungry that we can sit here and debate use cases and whatnot, but if we don't have electricity, there's nothing to talk about. So I think that the first concern is to have the right digital infrastructure before, well, not to say before, because we need to do all these things concurrently, but just to appreciate that if with half the continent not having electricity to run lights, we're sitting here talking about which use case is better for AI. So I just think that really underscoring the importance of investment in power on the continent and in developing nations is step one. It's a foundation. Without it, the rest of this conversation is pointless. Coming back to the second point, my second point is what you've asked me to speak about, and that is sort of how do corporates think about it. And I think that one of the differences between AI and previous technologies is that when you think about email, for example, if you were a government, head of a government, the head of a company, you would have someone in your IT department say, we've got this new way for you to communicate. And they would come into your office and they'd set you up and they'd give you some training and then they'd go away and then you would call the tech desk when you needed them, only when you needed them, when the computer didn't work. And that was the nature of the conversation between tech and people in government or business. And the difference between that and AI is that AI truly is a partner. It's not something that can be outsourced to the tech department. It's only as useful as the people who want to use it make it to be. And so, another way that I like to think about it, particularly in the African context, is, what is AI? Well, we think about AI as being something that has the capacity to mine lots of data, to recognize patterns, and then to make recommendations based on that. What is this similar to? It's similar in many cultures to the councils of elders. What are elders? They're people who have a lot of data. They're smarter than young people because they've just seen it again and again over decades. And why do we have councils of elders? Because two heads are better than one, because crowdsourcing produces better outcomes. So when you think of data as just this council of elder on steroids, how would you use your council? You could go to them with all sorts of questions. You could go to them for big business, you could go to them for small business, you could go for them for government. And the answers are very contextualized in every single case. So for example, you ask, how do corporations think about it? Well, it depends. You know, most African markets, you have 2 or 3 mobile operators. That's a big part of the economy in most African countries, are the cellular operators. Well, you have 2 cellular operators, at least in every market, one who focuses on cost, one who focuses on service. There's the one that the rich people use and the one that people do on a pay-as-you-go basis. So how would they use AI? Well, they'd look at it very differently, because the company that's focused on cost is likely to be using AI to figure out how to reduce its costs. The one that's focused on service is going to want to use AI to figure out how to improve service. So an example might be for the one that wants to, I think about, MTN versus Vodacom in many markets, or Airtel. The one that wants to provide better service may notice that its customers buy data at a certain time of the month, if you go through that data. So maybe they look over the last 12 months, and after payday, people buy more data. And so if they're looking to increase their revenues, then they may say, aha, maybe we're going to send an SMS out on payday and suggest that maybe it's time to top up and we have an offer. So that's how they're going to use AI, is to look at the data to figure out when people are buying, what the patterns are, and how you can increase your revenue doing that. The other telco is likely to look and say, well, we've got to reduce our costs. How can we use AI perhaps to improve our maintenance and anticipate when we're going to have problems so that we don't have as much downtime, which will overall improve our service, but also it'll help us to reduce costs. And so it's like going to the elders. It really depends on what it is you want. And I think that that's something that private sector and public sector are figuring out, is that the chief technology officer is no longer that guy down the hall. This is now someone who is your partner in every decision that you're making, because you need to talk to him or her to figure out what they have to offer, and then they need to understand what you're trying to solve for. And so I think that getting that notion of a partnership between the CTO, if it's in the private sector or whatever it's called in government, and the decision makers, as a real walking down this path together, hand in hand, solving problems, that's the way we're going to find the best use cases.
I can just jump in there and say, it's a great analogy, which also tells us about what AI can help us with the what, may not with the why, to your Council of Elders. And a good example, back to Kenya, is M-Pesa, the mobile money service. At some point, they wanted to stop disbursement of loans in the middle of the night because of the gambling issue. So they would see, the data showed them that there's always a surge of borrowing in the middle of the night. And so because the betting crisis has been a big one, they're like, we want to halt it. What they didn't realize is there's also market women, who borrow at that time to go start their day. And, by the way, and they'll pay back by the end of the day. And so there's some wisdom that will still have to come from humans understanding the context to pick out. So you'll have the AI helping you pick out the what, a trend, an anomaly. The why will need that council of elders in a way that will have to be decided. Is it AI mediated? Is it technology mediated? Is it ways of knowing that are encoded in technology? Is that the best way to do it? Because that's what tends to be missed, especially on the social, cultural, socio-economic scale. And that's very important to bear in mind about how even different actors will think about whether it helps them with the why so much as the what.
Those are fantastic points. And I think Umar's business as well uses a combination of remote sensing, big data analytics, but also people on the ground who go and figure out, is the Coca-Cola actually in the chillers? Do you actually have the chillers running, right? And this combination of in-person.
And the need for people, and especially in the financial fintech space, because there's a lot of push for AI to help assess better creditworthiness and to... The theory tends to be that if we have more data that helps us make sense of people's borrowing and spending patterns, we'll know how to disperse credit and so on. The fixation around that has also got people losing translation. Across Africa, we've found that if you want to actually include people financially and through digital platforms, you need people. Agent banking remains king and queen. You still need, it's the mom and pop shop that has an agent station. The other ones will help me, they'll talk to me about it. They'll tell me about it. I will go there if I have an issue. So that human element has been critical in driving adoption. We've also seen situations where when you try to formalize the informal, so for example, savings groups, and this is a fascinating case study about also what AI may not be able to do. Savings groups around for women, especially in marginalized communities, the good old, they have a box, they put their coins and they lock it and have 3 padlocks and 3 different members of the group goals, has worked better for digital financial, actually for financial inclusion, period, for women, than any AI intervention, than all the M-Pesas and everything else. Because there's another component to it, trust. You cannot commodify trust. And so despite all the billions really that have been spent around digital financial inclusion and last mile technology, and the quest for data so that I can know, what time, yeah, I can give you money at this hour. Those encoded ways of knowing have remained superior. And so how do we get to, well, the question becomes, will AI help us better understand that? What's the kind of data we can derive from those collectives that helps us make sense of that without necessarily saying we're gonna go in there and snoop because we want to have data points. Right. So there's a tension fundamentally around whether we want to datify everything or commodify everything in the sense of we want data that helps us make sense, or we'll remember there's also AI that can mean ancestral intelligence in the sense of we have the T and the T is about things working differently. And maybe the technology might not be this place, the mediating factor.
Right, excellent. That's fantastic. I mean, I opened with Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, saying that you can have a data center of geniuses. I think there's a real question: can we have a data center of elders? Can we go beyond just the smarts, just the raw intelligence? Can we encode more? And I think that's an open question. What's the correct interface between that data center of potential elders and the human-sourced elders as well?
But you said something that I wanted to jump in and just connect what she said is, you say raw intelligence. And this comes down to what defines us as humanity, yeah? When you're coming down to like, what is human intelligence? Is it measured by our IQ? And when you look at AI, it's replacing what we know as IQ. So when you read like the future of work papers that are coming out, what are the jobs that are going to be most replaced? Yeah, I mean, was it this week? No, it's last week on Monday that Bill Gates saying that in the next 10 years, AI is going to replace all the doctors and all the teachers, right? So if we are going to reduce ourselves, and that's what I'm going to use it as IQ, our ability to IQ ourselves, then there's a whole part of Africa that you do not understand. Because our identity is not formed in our intelligence as defined by if you have a triple-digit IQ, or it is defined on how I identify myself in a community, in a humanity. And that's why I love the elder example, because if we are going to have raw encoded intelligence, then we have the human in the loop bringing the community intelligence and the ancestral intelligence into the loop, making it complete. The completeness of an African intelligence is those 3 components. It's like me in my community and me and my ancestral lineage. Yeah, I always say you know somebody by their name and their clan, because your name encodes everything about you, which is lost to many people in the US. Because when somebody say my name is, it does not just mean my name. Like my name's Shikoh. It means the hardworking one. I know, right? and you will see that it was given to me by my grandmother, who was given to it by her grandmother. So it's been passed through and it was begun because of her trait as a human being. My great grandmother's trait was passed down to me, and likely will be passed down to my granddaughter because it always keeps a generation. How does it turn out? How does that component of names pass in an AI space if we are going to reduce ourselves to just our intellect?
I want to address that. There's a very interesting woman a Ghanaian woman, who many of you probably heard of at MIT, Joy Bulawini.
Yes, she's supposed to be here.
Yes. And you've probably seen her Ain't I a Woman, where she looks at facial recognition technology. And if you haven't seen it, it's really fabulous. You should really Google her. It's called Ain't I a Woman. And she's a spoken word artist, and she is a fascinating presenter. And so hearing her talk about data science in the context of poetry is really amazing. But I think that to the point that you're making, she looks, in this particular piece, at how facial recognition technology cannot identify famous faces of Black women like Michelle Obama, Serena Williams, just name any famous Black woman, Oprah. And I think that the thing that you're talking about is around how the coding is done. And her point is that when you look at who the coders have been, they see faces in the ways that are familiar to them. And so how far that eyes are apart, how the distance between the two cheekbones, different hairstyles. And so when you have millions and millions of images being coded by white men, then the AI doesn't learn how to identify Black women. But if you have Black women involved in coding, then it learns a lot of these things that are hard to articulate that you're speaking about. I mean, it's like whether the image comes up of, the point you make about your name being hardworking. Certain people might see pictures of you and may not identify you with the words hardworking. But if you are doing the coding and see a picture of yourself and think of yourself as hardworking and someone else who looks like you as being hardworking, then that's going to change the way the algorithm learns. And so I think that a lot of these cultural nuances come in by having a more diverse group of people involved in the industry, involved in the coding, because those biases then get baked in to how the data is perceived.
100%. Such an excellent point. I've been given the sign that we should move to Q&A, but I would be remiss, because there's so many ministers and government officials here today, that we didn't just do at least one question, and I'm going to put the burden on you, Umar, to talk about government and what governments want. Umar, putting the burden on you because you served as Pakistan's Federal Minister for IT and Telecom and Science and Technology prior to your current role. So tell us about how your government friends and counterparts are thinking about AI. Give us the top thing that's keeping them up at night and the thing that they're most excited about.
This isn't just an emerging markets phenomena, but let me talk from the Pakistan perspective. So the question number one is, how do you enable AI? And you enable AI by somehow incentivizing the private sector to fund these huge data centers that you need for enabling AI. And you could do that by having cloud-first policies, which means government departments don't buy their own computers anymore. They're forced to put them in a big data center and therefore create demand for superscalers, Amazon's, Azure, Google Cloud to put up these data centers in these countries. Force telecom companies, banks to keep their data in your territory so that there is local demand for data centers. Make sure that somehow you get government departments, telecom operators, social media companies, banks to have their data sets available for training AI systems, because these are the organizations typically sit on large data sets that you need to train AI systems. Somehow try and find a way where unused electricity, and every country has a lot of installed electricity capacity, and some fraction of that gets used at various times in the year, to evacuate that power close to a data center when it's not being used, and kind of do intelligent pricing for private energy producers so that data centers can be put next to them. Otherwise, you don't have electricity to power these data centers. The government doesn't have enough money to sponsor their own data centers. You really have to incentivize the private sector or do policy around data privacy, data security, data sovereignty to make sure that there is compelling need for putting these data centers together. The other issue is, while you need to temper the optimism and keep it real in terms of AI, there are compelling use cases for using AI within government and in private sector. To give you an example, in my company, we work with, I see a non sitting here with FCDO to generate property listings for property tax. Now that's a big source of tax pilferage in a country like Pakistan. Asim has worked on that a little bit also. And you have these property inspectors who go out and enlist properties and kind of record data that would eventually determine the tax liability for that property. But they typically get compromised by citizens for small bribes who would either have their property entirely omitted from this property listing or would understate the covered area of the property. That is a problem that AI can certainly solve very quickly just by using satellite imagery. That's what we've done with FCDO support in Pakistan, starting in KP through the program called Remit. We're working with, through the foundation now in Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, to use DHS data to predict health vulnerabilities, and then crowdsource data about pharmacies. Kenya has 12,000 pharmacies, 18,000 healthcare centers. Collect data about which vaccines are available there, what family planning products are available there, and use that data for better policy, and so on and so forth. So I think sort of as someone who's worked in the government, the challenge one is to enable AI, incentivize the private sector, make sure you use your energy pricing intelligently so that data centers can be powered with that, encourage, cajole, arm twist government departments, banks, telecom operators, social media companies to make data available for training these AI systems, and then have compelling use cases, which are not as contrived as some of the examples one typically hears, that government can actually use to facilitate citizens to do better tax collection, to rationalize their incentives or their subsidies or handouts to citizens using poverty mapping data, et cetera. So I think kind of those are the kind of things that keep someone like me up at night. How do I make AI happen? And what are the compelling use cases for AI beyond contrived examples of being able to generate an image or to replace a Harvard TA with ChatGPT, or a Harvard student who's also turned into a ChatGPT. So the assignment is being done by ChatGPT, graded by ChatGPT these days. I don't know how long it'll take to replace Harvard professors with ChatGPT, but this is where the real threat of job insecurity should exist, not in parts of the world that I come from.
Real.
Super. And can I just get a time check? How long do we have for Q&A? We have 20 minutes. Okay, can I just ask one more provocative question and turn it over? I started getting a lot of heat from the panelists. I'm going to end with a question that I'm sure will get a lot of heat. Our table at dinner last night asked, why do we need local data centers? Why can't we just use the cloud? Why is there regulation to localize? Why you talked about creating domestic demand, and then there are all these papers out. UNDP has said, oh, maybe we shouldn't create, data centers for every country. Maybe we should have a regional data center. But then doesn't that also just defeat the point? You still lose sovereignty when you have a regional data center. So excuse my ignorance. Please counter it.
No, but look at the U.S. policy around AI and semiconductors these days. And if a professor in a U.S. university were to talk to someone in China or seek funding from China, they run the risk of losing their job. That's how bad it is right now. So there'll be a lot of technology denial. You will not have access to large data centers overseas. You would not have access to trained AI models. So even if you open source AI means three things: the data that was used to train it, the model, and the weights. And not all AI models, even the ones that we think are open source, are actually open source. They are pretty black box. So you will be denied access to technology. You'll be denied access to data centers. You'll be denied access to GPUs that can be used to put these data centers together. And these walls are being raised at an exponential pace at this point because of various AI wars that are happening, mostly because of the misplaced optimism around AI and how it's going to revolutionize everything. But in the short term, I think countries like the one that I come from and many of the countries represented here are all thinking of how to kind of not be left behind when these walls go up.
And let me let me jump in because I think we had this discussion at breakfast. I like that he's speaking in future as problems. This is an active problem that we are facing in Africa right now, right? So the whole idea of sovereignty versus collaboration. And Zen was there we had a huge conference, an AI summit in Africa, and that was a big conversation: is should we collaborate more? Should we have sovereignty? And there's a case for both of them, but within the African continent. Why? Starting January 16th, I think, or 18th, whatever date it was, we lost a huge corpus of our health data. Anybody know why? Yeah. Because we cannot access that data because it was sitting in servers that have been killed. So we have all this, I was seeing the TB conversation yesterday, all this TB data that you're talking about was sitting in somebody's server in DC that we have no access to. So would you blame an African government for saying we want our own data center? Yeah, we wrote models, or my team wrote models during COVID. Those models are not sitting with us. They are sitting on a cloud somewhere that we can no longer access. Okay, can access because we are techies, because we're running it on our computers, but in a technical ideal world, they are still sitting on this server. So the case for sovereignty is, it's protectionist, right? It's protecting our sovereignty as a continent and as a country to make sure that if these walls, I like that he's used walls, so now I'm going to be using walls now. If these walls go up, you have something to fall back on. You're not starting from zero. And yesterday, is it Ronnie? No, it's not Ronnie. It is the director who was talking about two elephants fighting or making love. Right now, for Africa, we are being forced. I mean, he gave the example, that's why I picked up on it, is it China? Are we going to go with what are the?
DeepSeek.
No, not DeepSeek, the chips from China. I'm trying to remember, they're starting with an A. Are we going to do it? We're going to go with NVIDIA. I say we're going to go with both, yeah? Because DeepSeek has shown us that you can do compute with less than a 10th of the cost that it is to run a model out of the US, right? But we need to learn from like the best practice. Some of the US organizations are doing that. So you're going to take it from both of them. Because at the end of it, it's our sovereignty and our innovation and our people that we are going to default to. If we are just going to go pure geopolitical conversation, is we have to default to what is the best for the African continent. And if China and the US are fighting, compute has to be for the best interest of the continent. And if it's cheaper and better and more open source, let's go for it. That is my take on it. Yeah.
Super. Okay.
I want to add two things to that. I think one is that while we may experience these matters as the cloud, just remember there is physical infrastructure beneath that. That's what we do with these data centers. The data centers have to be located physically close to where the internet connections are coming in. So there is an actual physicality to this. And so if Africa and developing countries don't have their own data centers, they will by definition operate at slower speeds, because it has to go a greater distance in order to reach those data centers. So I think just being able to be competitive globally means you have to have it locally to have the best world-class speeds. And the second thing I think has to do also with how we think about data. And because data is intangible, we don't think of it as an asset. I mean, it's much like gold. And so, yes, could you keep all your gold in Switzerland? Sure. And maybe you want to keep some there for diversification in case things don't go well wherever you live. But you want your assets close to home, and you want to control your assets. So when we think of it like gold, then you think about why you want it at home, for all those reasons you would want gold at home.
Fantastic. Okay, we're going to turn over to the Q&A now. We're going to do 3 questions at a time. If folks could state your name and where you come from, and then go straight to the question. To the gentleman over here. Are we running mics? So to the gentleman over here in the front, and then maybe these two over here. Okay. Okay, let's wait for the mics to come.
Which is great because I can get to say what I wanted to say about that question. I started by saying this is about clarity. I think for me, clarity. The question around cloud and even cross-border data flows with trust betrays a truth, an uncomfortable one. There's an interest for some dependencies to still exist because cross-border data flows with trust tend to be about our data coming out, not your data coming to us. Not in one instance have I encountered, oh yeah, we're going to domicile this data in, say, Pakistan because they're experts on X. It's always our things going out. So that's, I think, just to remind you that the technological is political because when we use these terms, beneath that layer is the question of whether dependencies as have existed in the world order are expected to be retained.
And whose sovereignty is it anyway?
Fantastic. Okay.
Hi, my name is Ranjit. I'm from India, and I'm pursuing masters here at Ed School in Education Policy and Analysis. My question is to Mr. Umar. What key policy framework should these emerging economies implement to strategically balance the benefits of attracting investments and innovation from these big companies with the need to protect their own economic interests and citizens' data to foster the domestic growth?
Okay, let's do three, and then I mentioned these two over here.
Hello. Hi, Lee Simpson here from EdTech Hub. Thank you so much. Such an interesting discussion. I feel terrible that I've been asking my Council of Elders what my dog would look like as a human. So I'll definitely work with that bank of geniuses and elders in the future. I have been so fascinated by how the conversation has been very technological and very social, and just starting to touch on the political. I'm going to assume that there's a panel of optimists, and I'd love to hear from you. What is the opportunity in the shrinking donor funding and the changing donor landscape that you see? Thank you.
Hi, Francesco, University of Birmingham in the UK, and the UK Centre for Blockchain Technologies. Quick question, well, actually two, but super quick. First, can we use Umar's data from aiSight.ai to prove the studies mentioned about electricity in rural areas? So we can certainly use that as researchers to point it out that certainly that's rubbish. That's rubbish studies. But the other question would be like yesterday, dinner, Kamir and Asim made it clear how AI lowers the cost of expertise. So this is, what they mentioned. So do you think that the optimism from emerging economies that and from the panel that we're kind of seeing, it comes from, the fact that in a sense, on the one hand, that the developed countries have more to lose out of, the AI lowering their expertise, and so therefore see it as a risk. While younger, more energetic economies, emerging economies, see it as an opportunity in that sense. Thank you.
We're going to take one more over here.
Great. Thank you so much. My name is Bame Pule. I am here from Botswana. I'm an MBA graduate of the business school and also a member of the Dean's Council of the Harvard Kennedy School. My question is as follows. We know that in Africa today, much of the thoughts, writing and data are not making it onto the internet because of issues already spoken about with infrastructure and so forth. But we also know that, as was quoted earlier, the CEOs of Anthropic and OpenAI constantly tell us about how AI is already optimized and will continue to be very optimized. But if hundreds of millions of African, just English speakers, are not having their thoughts and writings and musings and data make it onto the internet, and as LLMs are being developed and as LLMs become foundations for AGI, then what does this omission mean? As this gap of communicators, just in English, are not making it into the inputs that are creating the next language model and that are presumably going to be the input to AGI. What shortcomings in the ultimate AGI are we going to see due to this input being absent?
Super. Okay, so the four questions, First one for Umar, key policy frameworks to balance innovation and protection. What do we do about the shrinking funding landscape? Is AI reducing the cost of expertise? And the final one about how do we ensure greater encoding of what's outside the digital universe?
So I can go first and try and answer your question. I think the key is to generate consolidated domestic demand for large companies to come and invest and then serve that demand domestically. So that's how you'll get investments, and that's how you'll get your data sovereignty. Now, the question is whether we even need to do it. The world has benefited by platformizing data and access. So the world that uses WhatsApp, the world that uses Facebook, the world that uses PayPal, an interconnected world that's served via a cloud that's not in any particular geography. There's a lot of platformization of technology, and everyone's benefited from that. Once you begin to silo it that way, where the demand is domestic and it's being served domestically, you certainly get foreign investment coming in. Whether the result would be just as powerful as we've seen earlier, or would the local economies lose out, the jury's still out on that. But there are countries that opted out of global platforms. They had a considerably large domestic demand. China is an obvious example. There are many other countries that use their own messaging systems, their own social media networks, their own digital financial systems. M-Pesa is a great example, and have done quite well. So I think, if as a policymaker and a selfish policymaker, and short-sighted, selfish policymaker, one would want to consolidate domestic demand by forcing the government to put everything on a local domestic cloud so that there is local demand for data centers, making sure that the data of the country stays inside the country. Many countries have data sovereignty policies, which would instantly create local domestic demand. So AWS would have to come and put a node there. All the superskillers would have to come there. Inevitably there'll be investment from private sector into this. But I'm not sure, as a college professor with a longer term view, I'm not sure whether in the long term it really is helpful for any single country or a set of people. I think opening it up, making it open source, having these global clouds and data systems that feed LLMs with all these languages and diversity of content, we'll all be better off. But you asked a question for a selfish, short-sighted policymaker, so that would be my answer.
Anybody else want to jump in on any of the questions? Rapid fire.
I would say I'll tie the cost of expertise and the shrinking donor landscape, because after all, we're in the Center for International Development. I think it's a moment of reckoning, and I think we'll really get to see what actually works. And the expertise, the cost that will be lowered will be the external parachuting in and bombardment, I should say, of knowledge, of things, of RCTs, of pilots. Pilotitis will die, gosh. Pilot program after pilot program, 50 years of pilot programs maketh not development, right? So I think it's really a moment to even encourage folks who've been working in the development sector to actually to review all these impact studies that are commissioned and actually answer the very simple question: what actually works? And we'll find it's the basics that we use leapfrogging as this terminology around. We're going to jump these quantum leaps from we don't have electricity grid, but we're going to connect people to AI somehow. Please. We have to go back to the basics, right? And I'm glad that electricity has been a sort of undercurrent of a conversation here, because the cost to connect on that is both about manufacturing in the analog sense and what this digital technological future present so on goes to. And lastly, just the question of expertise, because yesterday my face contorted when that came up, was how we define these things. We tend to use these terms, and we need to start clarifying what that means. So in my case, in this case, I would say it would be this expertise that comes into context that is not suited for it. And that lowering of our cost is welcome at this time.
Okay, last 1 minute on that on that
On
question.
the data
Yeah.
side, okay, and that's a very good question. And when you
And sorry, could you just repeat the question for?
okay, so the question was around the lack of African data, even English spoken data, in the training of LLMs, right? And there are many like initiatives across the African continent that are working towards collecting the right types of data and feeding into the models. I mean, I already talked about the King James Kikuyu and King James Swahili, which is what the many LLMs are doing. But getting local initiatives that are building local models, feeding in local language is what is important. Going back to our first question around context, is like, who is capturing that context? It's the local researchers, the local schools, the local churches, all those folk are producing this. So I'll give you an example. We have a model out on Hugging Face, and it's in something called Swa English. And in this Swa English, we're trying to say, how do we move away from these King James types of Swahili to like a language that we actually speak on a normal basis? What is the one source of truth of local language in African countries? Yes, churches, because they speak like a normal person. We got recordings, YouTube recordings, Facebook recordings, and literally trained an audio model that will be able to speak like a normal Kenyan. Yeah, and that's how you do it. You have to do it proactively by building local models, right? I'm not expecting, and Ron is amazing, right? I'm not expecting them to drop everything and come and try and train on our models. It's creating these initiatives and calling out. Botswana is quite amazing in terms of how do we start creating our own models. And this, going back to sovereignty, should each small country create their own models. But if you're going to protect our language and our context, we need to be able to create initiatives that are going to build this. And this is where I do the plug. Last 3 weeks ago, I'm blanking out, during this summit in Africa, we launched an AI research scientific panel, and my colleague is here somewhere. To basically do this is to provide support to governments who are wanting to do things like this, to build a local model with local context, with local languages, and not just in English. I keep saying this, everybody's saying, oh, we are digitizing local languages. Only 60 of African languages are digitized. Not AI ready, digitized, which means there's 1,940 other languages that are not digitized. So even as we're speaking about English, we are speaking about this other population of people that have been left behind. Is how do we then support governments? How do we support universities to be able to build this support? And it starts by having our own compute and building our own talent base that is able to collect, digitize, and label these languages for use for it to be AI ready, to be able to use in training of models. And it starts from that grassroots. It's not here. It is starting with those university and technical university and institutions being able to collect this data, digitize, and then label it for use. I hope that helps.
I know we're done.
Close us out, Teresa.
Boy.
Synthesize the whole thing. Fantastic.
No, I want to do something very selfish, actually. You said plug, and I realized that my whole team at Africa.com is going to be mad at me because I didn't say what I was supposed to say all this time. We're launching aiAfrica.com. Many of you from South Africa may know aiAfrica. It was a portal in South Africa back in the 90s. And its initials are IA, and we are relaunching it as IA for AI. And so starting next month, please visit us at aiAfrica.com, which will be a very comprehensive place to learn about AI. We're partnering with D-Cubed and using a lot of the data that they have and resources to train and learn about AI. It'll be a place with news about developments on AI in Africa. It'll be a place for community, for people who are interested in AI in Africa. So just remember, aiAfrica.com.
Well, you win, Teresa. That was fantastic. This was all just a signposting for all these fantastic individuals. Please join me in thanking them, and please talk to them after this panel. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm going to make just a couple of quick announcements. Thank you for an amazing panel here.
Use the mic because we're live.
Oh, we are live streaming. Okay, great. Can they? Okay, great. So thank you all. Amazing panel. We're going to get our hands dirty with the AI now. I love, Teresa, I loved your example of that entrepreneur, like building that you collected the survey from Shikoh, the example of like bringing the YouTube data in and training. We might not get to her levels today in what we're gonna do, but you're gonna use AI to design a policy intervention. And what's fun is you are going to do it in teams. We're going to go up to the Williams room. That's where you had breakfast. Go up there. There will be tables. We're going to start at 11:20. I'm going to cut a little bit into the time we have. We're going to start at 11:20 a.m. so we have time for a break. There are snacks in the hallway. There are stickers and swag in the hallway. Please take them. They look very nice. And then we will go up and we will do an exercise. We will walk you through what that exercise is, but also a great way to meet other people at the conference. So I encourage you to sit at tables with people you don't know. You will be working together to design some policy using AI. It is going to be a blast. So see you all upstairs at 11:20.